Hey there, I'm Tracy Spears, speaker, author, coach, founder of Exceptional Leaders Lab, and head cheerleader for anyone wanting to play bigger. This week, I'm going to introduce you to someone that I've spent a few hours with recently, and I cannot quit thinking about our conversation. I'm super excited to introduce you to Dr. Jennifer Clark. Educated at the University of Kansas School of Medicine and trained at the Medical University of South Carolina and the Harvard Fellowship of Palliative Care Education and Practice, Dr. Clark has been in the world of healthcare for over 20 years. With MedPeds training and board certification in the subspecialty of hospice and palliative medicine, Dr. Clark is a physician and healthcare delivery consultant serving in various roles as a clinician, educator, administrator, and innovator at the local, national, and international levels. When not serving in her volunteer role for Clarehouse, Tulsa's Home for the Dying, Dr. Clark teaches at the University of Tulsa and collaborates with various organizations dedicated to fostering innovative approaches to human flourishing. She is also the author of the book Suffer, which is scheduled to be released this fall, but you will want to pre-order your copy after this conversation, I promise. Suffer is the first in a series about her life as a physician and offers the life lessons that she has learned while caring for people living with serious illness and facing life's end. She discusses using a modernized approach to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I promise we're going to discuss today. You can find her at thegiftofchoosing.com. Jennifer, I'm so excited. I have butchered this whole bio, but I'm so excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
No, I'm serious. I'm always excited when I do these, but with you, it's amped up a bit because I have so many questions. I don't think we're going to have enough time because I spent a couple of hours with you. Thank you, by the way, for that. We holed up after I moderated a panel and that you were part of, and I was so, energized by that conversation that I couldn't wait to introduce you to the audience. So I'm just thrilled you're here.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, of course. Right. So I read your bio, all this stuff. You were like, I added a few things to it, took a few things away. But let's talk about you. Tell the audience, if you don't mind, just a little bit about you personally. Where did you grow up? Kind of get us into the, how do you end up in this kind of position that you're in now?
Oh, gosh. So I am the oldest of 4 daughters to a very young set of parents who originated in the heart of Motor City. My dad's entire family, basically started itself in the automobile industry in Detroit. And so grew up in the heart of Detroit. And when I was 11, my dad ventured out on his own and moved all of us to a little teeny town called Hays, Kansas.
Nice.
Yeah. So you can imagine what that shock was like at a very young age. Because of my birth order and because natural capacities of curiosity and problem solving, I started working at a young age in my dad's dealership, played a significant role not only in my core family, my nuclear family, but my extended family, which is huge. My dad was one of 7, my mom's one of 5, and everybody's got like 3, 4 kids or more. So, one of the most transformative experiences of my life was an exchange student in high school that took me to Japan when I was 15. Quickly moved into the world of really understanding cultures at a very different level at a young age that led to my studies in business, actually, in undergrad at the University of Kansas. Yes, Rock Chalk, Jayhawk.
I knew we were going to get that in there.
Not, right? And really, it was interesting. It was those travels that, kind of led me astray a little bit in going to medicine. I had to kind of find myself first. And so I worked actually for a while and traveled all over the world, kind of playing and, kind of really exploring who I was, what the world had to offer. And through a few other transformative experiences, found myself at the door of medicine and entered into it wholeheartedly, committed, felt vocational in that process. And I was very lucky at that point. Life presented itself with a sequence of very, very important, serendipitous relationships and experiences that brought me to the door of palliative medicine. Going through that process, which is a disruptive technology to a medical system that has a hidden curriculum that death is a failure. I would, I was starting to push at the edges of an antiquated system from the very beginning. And the developmental skills in that and the successes I had in that moved me from the bedside and palliating the one-to-one to moving to the boardroom and palliating the one to the many. And so did that as a chief medical officer of a large healthcare system for a few years, and then went into my own work, consulting and doing that same thing across not only healthcare systems, but educational, governmental systems and organizations who are really interested in delving into the subject of suffering and, creating spaces where not only can we acknowledge our suffering, but actually move through rescue and recovery to prevention, promotion, and flourishing. And so I teach to that, I consult to that, and now I write to that.
Can you believe? I love that you are writing about all of this. I want to go back. You said something about, because of your birth order, you said it kind of casually. Tell me more about that. I'm an only child, so I don't know what you were referencing.
Yeah. So I was the product of a teenage pregnancy. My parents were very young, but my extended family, I kind of sit between two generations. I'm actually closer in age to my youngest aunts and uncles than my parents are to them. So was surrounded by adults and adult-like thinking, from the beginning of my life. And not until my sister was introduced, 2.5 years later, was there another kiddo around. I mean, I was the first grandchild on both sides, kind of that whole thing. And, everybody's got their nature and nurture, right? The cards you're dealt and then how you're taught to play those cards and what rules you have to play within kind of thing. And, I had an aunt and my grandfather particularly who were really interested in what I had to say, even as a small child, and would sit and just entertain my blatherings and answer I was one of those kids that would ask, like, why is the sky blue? And would, listen to Sesame Street and all of a sudden start speaking in Spanish. And so, it was like, so there was these, people tell me these stories of trying to harness this little kid who was just this blah, 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 asking all sorts of different questions. And when I wasn't asking questions, they were really concerned because I was observing and they knew that there was a barrage coming later, kind of thing. And so I was lucky enough that I had, my parents had wherewithal enough and my extended family had wherewithal enough to kind of aim my cannon of questioning. But when we moved away from my extended family, I moved into a parental role at a very young age.
Understood. What I love about what you just said is a lot of those super curious kids are just told because I said so. So you were in an environment that fostered that curiosity. I love knowing that.
Yeah. And I had a kindergarten teacher. Mrs. Arlen will always have a little angel wings and halo in my life. So
nice.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So as you know, this podcast is called Shifting Out Loud, and it's about those moments where you shifted. You've already described a couple of shifts, by the way. But looking back, what would be the one that you think, was the big one? I'm going to guess it's moving to Hays, Kansas. Has to be a big shift that changed everything. But what kind of comes to mind for you that you were like, wow, this happened and my life moved in a different direction?
Gosh, there's so many of them. So I think when people ask, kind of how did you end up in palliative medicine of all things, right? And when I came out of college, I had my undergrad in business administration with an emphasis in international studies, and did East Asian emphasis because of my experience in Japan. And I had continued that learning kind of through. So anticipated being able to travel about the world. And I did, at a young age. But, a year in to that experience, despite having all the resources one could have to be successful. And we could talk about what the definition of successful is, because that was probably one of the biggest kind of aha moments for me, is that despite all the external markers of success, I was wildly dissatisfied and unhappy with my life. And I was given Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way by my boyfriend at the time, and was just kind of like, he's like, you know, figure your shit out. Okay. And so I jumped into that wholeheartedly because I was suffering. I was really, really just struggling with, this is not fundamentally who I am. And I knew that, but it was like, at 22, 23, what do you do with that? Right. And so, really started exploring things, using that as a framework. As we talked about the other night, when I have structure a little bit, the creativity in me can kind of rest in a safe space to kind of allow itself to come out. That's not necessarily true for many creatives, but for someone who has enough left brain stuff, I need to have enough structure to feel safe for my right brain to show up. And so
I understand that.
and so really started doing that and explored heavily the world of architecture and heavily the world of medicine, because both of them called and did to different parts of who I was. And I was in an emergency room volunteering because despite the fact that my grandfather was a physician on my mom's side and everybody's nurses, like my grandmother was a nurse, my aunt's a nurse, if we go down the line, healthcare is a big theme in my family. My two of my three sisters are nurses, kind of thing. But at the time, it was common. My grandfather and I were really close and things like that. But I really wanted to know what it felt like. I wanted to make as much of an informed decision about completely altering the trajectory of my life by going back to medical school as a quote unquote non-traditional student. I wanted to make sure I was doing that appropriately. And so I was volunteering. And at the time I was living in St. Louis. And so I went to Barnes Jewish, which is a huge medical center, academic medical center. And I was volunteering in the emergency room. And when you volunteer, you do everything. And at that point, I was like cleaning out bins and getting coffee for people, kind of waiting and all that kind of stuff. And I came around there was a corner where, kind of the most urgent cases were. And I happened to walk around the corner and, all of a sudden something was like internal to me, kind of, I now can name it as fear, right? Just called my attention, and I turned around and basically an EMS crew was coming in on the gurney doing CPR on an older gentleman. And I turn around, and at that moment, his wife just grabs me and drags me kind of into this, what I call the melee. And I found myself as a young person bearing witness to and guarding this woman as she was watching her husband die.
Wow.
And in that moment, I was like, oh, okay, this is it. Like right now thinking about it, just I was like, oh, this is where I'm meant to be. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. Did at that point I have any idea what palliative medicine was, what hospice was? I didn't. That language wasn't even there, right? So I just knew that, I have to go to medicine. And I would later understand that experience was the thing that set off this stage, that would set me on the road to palliative care and really the work that I do now.
Tell me about the emotion that's coming up for you and now me watching you tell that story.
Yeah.
What's that emotion about?
So when you look at, kind of naming there's so many multiple emotions, right? There was the profound call, right, of fear, right? Which is, as we'll get into, is an issue of safety, right? It was just like, okay, something big's about to happen. And, people who can predict, I think Brene Brown talks about that. When you grow up in a chaotic household, you learn to actually see the signs and feel when the proverbial shit hits the fan. Like you can predict it happening within minutes, typically. And so that first rush, I could feel that coming up as I was telling that story, kind of thing. And it was really weird. I went from fear all the way through to wonder, awe, and then collapse back down into anguish. Literally, so anguish will collapse you. And I'm sitting with this woman, the two of us are physically kind of holding ourselves up, um, uh, and then just deep, profound sorrow. And so feeling all of that in that moment kind of rushed up and, the recall of that tender memory. Um, and then as I said it, kind of stepping back and as I said it into the context of my life, um, there's a transcendent emotion in there that's flavored with compassion and gratitude.
Hmm. I love that. You have command of being able to identify your emotions in a way that most don't. And I love that about you. But I also know that's been your life's work, is to think about that in that context. And when you referenced Maslow's hierarchy, the other night in the panel, and also I did get to read, for the audience, I got to read a little preview of the book, so there's a lot in there about that as well. And as someone that I have what I thought was an understanding of Maslow's hierarchy, and now I realize, oh, I just had an awareness of it. So you have it at a much deeper level. So as you
Mhm.
described that experience, that feels like a microcosm of your work, yes?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. Um, just to give a little framing around that. So, going back to my family of origin, I, you know, that curiosity was really about, was fortunate enough to see adults that were highly developed. And that's the language I use now. As a kid, I was just like, huh, why are they like that? And, this person's like that, right? Kind of thing. And I could tell quickly because of, the environment, that emotional tenor and whether or not I was, kind of, do I need to predict and run for cover? And, um, I was able to read emotions pretty quickly and I knew who was unhappy and who wasn't, right? I knew who generally like had their stuff together and like things like that. I was really curious about that. I mean, I have a distinct memory of that at age 5. Like I have
Wow.
and so things have always, my life has always been flavored by that. And I found myself really open and exploring while I was in medicine. Found I really wanted to go into med peds, which is internal medicine and pediatrics combined into a 4-year residency. So I ended up I was bilingual essentially in the world of medicine. With the idea, I really want to understand human development and flourishing. And so got into narrative ethics and bioethics and why people make decisions they make and really looking beyond the pathology that we think of developmental pediatrics in, kind of everything from the psychological things like ADHD and the more neurobiological things like autism and stuff like that. But looking more beyond kind of how do we promote flourishing? How do we, how do we promote that? So went into med peds with that kind of mindset. So I was always looking for that data. I was always looking for things. And I always, there's so many frameworks out there. And I always kept turning back to Maslow, turning back to Maslow, turning back to him. And so from a young professional standpoint, Maslow's hierarchy I've always been really interested in that and in really kind of using that as again, a framework for the creativity of my practice to kind of to show itself. And so whether I was at the bedside of an end stage heart failure patient or at the bedside of a patient who was doing well, but living with a serious illness like sickle cell anemia or cystic fibrosis, I could quickly assess where their needs were, what was required for them to move beyond rescue, recovery, and neutral into a more promotive and preventative at best, but promotive even more so state of mind, and helping them kind of remove some of those barriers. And as I moved into the world of palliative medicine, it took on a whole other level of practice that moved me psychologically from a state of being a young doctor to a physician to now I still kind of get clump to kind of saying it, but now to a healer standpoint. That's the evolution of physicianhood. And kind of the book is the culmination of all of that kind of personal trajectory layered with professional experiences that have really informed kind of life in general, kind of as a guidepost and kind of say wayfinding as, kind of life presents itself. What am I going to be dealing with? So.
When you describe being a kid in that environment and you were, aware of staying ahead of what was about to happen. I shared that with you as a kid. My experience in that was I always felt the responsibility to ensure that it didn't go off the rails. You seem to have more of an observer experience in that. I don't know if that's true or not. So that's my first question. And then the follow-up to that is in that space where you are watching all of that happen, did it just ignite curiosity in you, or did it ignite something deeper, I guess? Like when those moods were about to be changed or whatever, what was your role in that?
Oh, God. So yes, I played an observer role because it was about discernment. I had to decide if it was worse. I had to conserve energy because it was constant. So I had to discern. I was really good at observing and discerning. Yeah, this is going to get intense, but it's not. We'll just let it kind of run its course and die out, versus the heavy responsibility of actually taking action and inserting myself in that situation to divert whatever event was about to occur, whether that was protecting my own self, protecting my siblings, or even protecting my parents from themselves. And so,
interesting.
And so, so the weight of responsibility was on my perceived weight, because it's so funny now. My sisters and I always talk about different experiences. And as you guys know, we grew up in the same household, but had this wildly different childhoods, right? And so, responsibility has been over my head my entire life. And actually one of the most profound experiences I had in my older years and my more, kind of as I was moving out of the traditional medical system into the current role that I'm in right now, I did a lot of self-reflective exercises and deep dives into different things, and had a transcendent experience that some internal voice that was wickedly loud to the point where I almost fell on my face. Like I was walking, and the voice was, "You are no longer responsible." And it was like, you are no longer responsible. Let it go. I mean, it was I'm not my typical blah, 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 blah voice, but that voice of intuition, that voice some people call God, whatever that voice is, your genius. I mean, there's all sorts of different words for it, but it was an otherworldly voice that internally rose out of me, but felt like was coming from another place outside of myself. So it was this weird paradox of both and, that in certain terms, I'm walking down this pathway and I, kind of this loud bang of, "You are no longer responsible," feeling like it hit me upside the head to the point where I stumbled and had to almost had to do a somersault roll to catch myself.
Wow.
And so, so kind of
That's
when
a
you said
shift.
that, oh yeah, major shift. That was a huge shift. Yeah.
Did you get it? Or did you?
I did. I totally got it.
Yeah.
It was all the work that had led up to that. Everybody's got their parts in them that they are still young and still traumatized and still emotionally immature, that we throughout our lifetime need to kind of bring into maturity as we're ready. And that was one of mine, based on just what you were talking about.
I know we can't recreate the conversation we had the other night, nor do I want to, because it was for me and you. But but you described the way you described that putting back together. That's going to make me cry. That was so profound on me that it has changed how I move about the world.
Oh,
and I don't know if there's any way to give the audience a sense of that or we could just frustrate them and move on. But I just want to say thank you, mostly because the shards going back together, when I'm having a little bit of pain, over some things I'm going through, I was like, oh yeah, it's supposed to hurt. That's hurt. Yeah, this is just part of you going back together. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Anything we could offer the audience?
Yeah, I think so. And
Okay.
and you guys can decide how you want to put it in or not. Simply when you take care of people who are dying, there is a lot to be learned. And I would encourage anyone who is going through self-discovery to delve into the studies of what we call mortality salience, this awareness that one day we will die. It actually transforms, as it did you, this the living that we do in the setting of the fact that someday we will go through death and dying. So there's, kind of the people who study recalled experiences of death. It's a little more nuanced than near-death experiences. This is really very centric around someone has been declared dead, and not like psychedelic experiences or out-of-body experiences or astral travel or all the other near-death experiences that we study. These are people who have recalled experiences of death. And there's 4 parts. First part is an awareness that one's dying and separating from the body. Second part is this anticipatory change, like you're going on a trip or like planning of some sort. It causes restlessness in people. The third piece, and the piece that this kind of applies to, is that there's an educational life review that happens. People talk about having their life flash before their eyes, and things like that. And so this educational life review is profoundly important, and we'll come back to that. And then the fourth piece is this sense of fullness and the sense of just like profound and utter relief and contentedness that people label as coming home, is kind of the phenomenon that it's called. So there's a lot to be learned in all 4 of those parts, but the part I want to return to, and the part that you're referring to, is this life review. And it's something that we who take care of dying people really take to heart in our own lives. In this life review, it's best described by the Native American tradition, and I apologize. This has been such a core part of my practice that I had forgotten which tradition it was told to be one of my patients, and I, for some reason, can't remember. I don't think it matters, but people always ask, well, which tribe or which tradition? And I'm like, I know it's Native American origin. So that as we live this lifetime, when we go through emotionally intense experiences that our body minds are not prepared to handle, we leave a shard of ourselves in the past. And it's our responsibility as we go through this life to return to those shards and bring them bring them back into our being as we are developmentally ready to do so. Those shards that remain at the end of life, if they're not done during the lifetime, are done during the dying process and the act of death. And so, so the message my patients have told me, they're like, don't wait. Go be curious about the shards of yourself and bring them forward, because otherwise this process will definitely do it for you. And it will be much more painful than needs to be. And so the richness of their lives, yes, it's a painful, arduous experience. They would never give it up. It's this weird, paradoxical experience of wholeness that is so worth the pain that comes with, to your point, returning shards into one's being. And so it's a profound lesson that I have learned and have come to appreciate, particularly as you get into Maslow's later growth needs and, kind of being needs, that acceptance of one's self in its entirety, all the good, bad, and the ugly, is a necessity that we have in order to move into the highest level of development, which is transcendence.
Mm-hmm. And are you saying that you can enter that whole before you are actually dying? And go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah. Yes, you can. Yeah.
And by when you say that, like, I mean, I'm fundamentally changed as a human being because of that conversation, because
Mhm.
that I like to run away from all of those things. I don't wanna deal with all the pain and all the things, and yet they do keep recurring, weirdly. You can probably describe to me why. And so for me to sit in the pain and just for the audience, gosh, I mean, I'm, going through a divorce and, lots of things looking back, lots of, wow, moments. I had that same experience that you described, the voice that spoke to me in a way that, um, shifted me, we'll say that. And so now I'm sitting in the discomfort of all of that, and that idea that I gotta go back and learn some of that stuff is exciting to me, but it's also scary. When you first jumped on the call here today, you asked how I was doing, and I gave you, like, 92 different emotions, like, I don't know how to reconcile it. I assume that I'm in the middle of that, and that's normal, yes?
Yes. Yeah. So when you look at Maslow's hierarchy, let's just kind of jump into that a little bit. Um, the tradition, kind of there's a traditional pyramid, which by the way, Maslow did not, had no hand in,
What?
had no hand in the pyramid.
I speak all over the world and use his pyramid.
Yeah.
What?
So I'm gonna call you out, sister. So
Do
like,
it.
so he came out with the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and the hierarchy comes from prepotency that we'll talk about in a second. But hierarchy of needs in 1940s, like early 1940s, and post World War II, the whole business world and capitalism became a norm in the United States, and a business consultant took it and put it into a pyramid and sold it as a consultant to kind of teach organizational psychology.
Oh my gosh, does that make everything I've said reductive in some
No.
way? Okay.
No, the problem is what it does though is that it moves it codifies the American tendency to achievement, and so it's not a video game that once I achieve this, I got this, I got this, I got this. Needs are not like that. Needs
Understood.
are prepotent. So there's kind of two kind of strategies you have to think about. So there's the overarching development trajectory, meaning we are dependent humans. We are dependent beings as humans. We have the longest childhood of all mammals, right? So we have dependency. Then we have independency, so asserting one's self. And then we have interdependency, where we choose to be in relationship to someone else or something. And then we have transcendence. And so that's the developmental trajectory. And you can set the needs in that framework, right? So from a developmental standpoint, we all need to feel physically safer. We are frail beings in a very chaotic world, and we require air, food for fuel, water, shelter, meaning we need to be careful of our environment. That includes the things seen, the things unseen, and people, other animals, and sleep. And sleep and shelter kind of go together, right? We need to have a place where we can lay our head down and rest. Air, food, water, shelter, sleep, kind of everybody's got to feel safe, right? We also need to feel connected. So the need for safety, need for connection really is about dependence. And we talk about attachment, right? Our attachment to our early caregivers. It's, kind of, the Maslow confuses that with love and belonging. And love is oftentimes confused in the American society with romantic love. And that's not what this is. This is secure attachment and belonging, that not only are you loved for being part of our family, but you are also loved for being different and having your own opinions, which allows you then to move into independence. And in independence, we have the needs of self-esteem and exploration that come out, right? Who am I fundamentally in this world? And can I affect change, right? And then I feel secure enough in who I am that I am willing to take the risk of going out and figuring out what the world has to offer. And, really developing that muscle of curiosity and things like that. And then as you develop, esteem and you begin to explore, then you're interests move from independence into interdependence, where you choose to engage with other people purposefully,
Mm,
right? To create a third thing. And this is where Maslow's needs get translated in all sorts of different ways. The most recent one in the science is through a guy by the name of Scott Barry Kaufman. He wrote a book called Transcend that really takes Maslow's unwritten writings and brings them in. I call the next need intimacy, and not, sometimes it's called love, sometimes it's called other things. But based on the experience I have and the one that conversations like the one you and I had, the need for intimacy is this fully wanting to be known and moving from your family of origin to your family of choice.
right.
And that family being loosely defined as people or ideas or, vocations, whatever it is that you're engaging with something or someone on purpose. And as a result, you are fully seen, fully felt, and fully known. And then that leads to the last need of purpose, this whole idea of understanding one's role in this lifetime, what lessons need to be learned, and living from a newer level, a newer faculty of consciousness that includes both left brain, right brain, and a whole kind of whole brain living approach to things that leads to the last stage of human flourishing, which is transcendence. And so when you return back to what you were talking about, this level, your need for intimacy is profoundly challenged, obviously. And one of the things that happens in that is you talk about the deep, dark night of the soul. Like you hear about people suffering something, right? Experiencing some external event or some sort of internal state that renders their life in complete oblivion. And you feel very isolated. That's the suffering of the need for intimacy going unmet. You feel isolated. But you have enough self-awareness and enough self-esteem and have explored yourself enough that it becomes, what am I missing? What stories, what lessons keep repeating themselves for me to go back? And there's obviously a shard of myself that needs to be attended to. And so you start curiously going back into your own life and reflection so you can bring those things forward and fully accept oneself. And in that, the experience of love and all its variations of compassion and joy and paradox and all of those things kind of come into fruition. But it's that of suffering isolation, craving the need for intimacy. And it's about being intimate with oneself and knowing who and what in the past needs to be brought forward and accepted in all its glory. Mm.
I wish we could do that like over a weekend or something. That would be nice.
I would love to. I've done a couple of retreats that kind of have
Okay.
opened that up for people. I would love to do that. Yeah, for sure.
Done. Okay. And define intimacy.
So there's lots of ways to think it. I love the nuance of into me, see, right? So it's like breaking it apart. So it requires a level of courage and vulnerability and self-awareness in order to take biggest risks of your life, which is opening yourself to the receipt and reciprocity and creating something outside oneself, right? So it's, whether that's another person, you've got the two of you that, kind of create this third thing that's called a relationship, or you have an intimate relationship with patients. That's a reciprocal relationship that has a design, that is designed to kind of say, I'm coming into this, you're coming into this, and we're creating this third thing that we call your life and your health, right? Kind of deal. People talk about it from a creative standpoint. So I understood I was entering into a relationship with an idea around suffering in Maslow's hierarchy of need. And so it was an idea that I was engaging with. And Elizabeth Gilbert, in her book, Big Magic, talks about that intimacy. So to me, intimacy is a vulnerable risk in opening oneself to the most powerful experiences of a human life, which is creativity, love, compassion, all those higher virtues that, Aristotle talks about. And so it's purposely It's purposely doing that and saying, I know I can't do it alone. And so
That's
I
right.
become interdependent, and not codependent, or what I love. A lot of people live independent lives in parallel, right? Oh, I'm in a relationship, but basically you're just there is no real, like, very little crossover in the true living. It's, we're cohabitating, moving forward in the same direction, but it's parallel, independent lives, not truly interdependent.
Mm. Ooh, that landed. So for you, is that intimacy as somebody that has been at the bedside of people transitioning? My
Mm.
guess is that that's where it's the most intimate people ever are because they have nothing to lose at that point. Describe that process for me. Is that even true?
For most, I think it is. When you mortality, I mean, it's one thing to have mortality salience. Like, I know that yes, death is amongst my life on a day-to-day basis, but I don't have a chronic illness. I don't perceive, unless there's a trauma that's coming, that death is on my doorstep, right? The experience of knowing that one is going to die in a matter of a very short period of time, whether it be months, weeks, days, hours, minutes, um, there is a rawness that comes with, I don't have time to worry about all the bullshit, right?
Right.
So that all gets completely stripped away. Um, and so people are willing to move into that intimate space a little bit more easy, right? Easy is not the right word. Willingly, I
Right.
guess. Um, and my challenge would be like, why wait? I mean, why do you have to wait until death's on your door to do that make that decision, right? Um, but that death removes that risk, right? That you're talking about, that call of vulnerability and courage, that one must take outside the context of a crisis, right? Because we, as a consultant, both of us love to take advantage of a crisis, right? There's
That's
nothing
right.
like that to change somebody or something. Um, but it's that piece that I've learned at that point that yes, this intimacy is wickedly powerful. And why wait until life's end
Right.
to make that decision? You know,
What's the
but you
answer to that? Why do
don't
people
wait. Don't
but why do people do it? Is it because of the fear?
all
What's
the
your fear?
yeah, all the things, right? It's
The
it's not
pain?
easy. It's pain.
No
It's
shit.
yeah. It's on. It's being honest. It's facing hard stuff, whether it's regret, remorse. So regret, kind of things that you haven't done, remorse, things that you've done to harm other people. You know, um, forgiveness, right? Um, all of those things. A lot of people don't want to do that work.
Yep.
And honestly, a lot of people, um, it requires time and space and intentionality and purpose in one's life. And if you're too busy, which is the bane of particularly American culture, is that we reward busyness,
Yep.
right? And
For
when
sure.
you're busy, you don't have to think about any of those things. And it's not until a crisis that takes up your entire schedule and clears it all. Not only are you dealing with the acute crisis, you're now dealing with all of these unattended things that are being impacted by this crisis. And um, so it's one of those, like, as you grow your own mortality salience, the awareness and, taking that awareness that people who are dying feel and bringing it much further upstream into one's lifetime to say, I need to find the time now. I mean, right? To do the things that matter most to me.
When did that shift happen for you?
Ooh, I, it, oh gosh, there were several kind of things along the way. But that, kind of, I had one aha moment, around the time my kids were born. Um, uh, Postpartum depression forced that upon me. And I took advantage of, okay, if I'm going to suffer this and my children are going to suffer this and my husband is going to suffer this, it's going to make meaning of something, we're going to, so, so that awareness that was timed with my own palliative care training, and that's intense. And so I had a lot of mentors who were challenging me in ways, if you can't I can't be a healer if I don't self-heal. Like
Right.
I have to be able to create enough of a container and know where I begin and end so that when I present myself in of service, that I'm not enmeshing myself with someone
Right.
or unaware, kind of thing. That's a problem in healthcare that we can talk about if we have time. But um, so there was a lot of that was happening. But I will tell you, it was creating a context for that moment where I got walloped with the "you are no longer responsible" thing. That life in its expression, outward expression, its orientation completely changed to honor what it is I was talking about. So I moved from talking my talk to walking my walk in
Mm,
that moment.
mm. And gosh, so I don't know how long I've known you, but I've known of you. We've had dinner, and
Yeah.
there is definitely a different energy that you bring in a room now that right? Like you feel that, yes?
I don't know. I mean, that's I know that my energy internally has shifted. Um, People's experience of me, which is a whole interesting thing to kind of delve into. Like, how do you experience me? Right. People tell me that they're, things like you bring a presence or something, they'll describe that experience. So
Yeah.
that's your experience of me. And I'm curious about it, um, but I'm fully aware in a way that's no longer deficiency based,
Oh,
right? So that awareness that both of us experienced as kids that gave us these kind of predictive, powerful tools of engagement, moved from a deficiency defense standpoint into one of growth and yearning and longing and belief and faith and curiosity and all the good parts of things that welcomes both the hard, painful and the beautiful. One of my friends calls it the terrible sublime. It's an artistic
yes.
expression,
Sure.
right? And so I think to me that was probably what happened is I'm from a defensive, predictive, you know, Girl Scout all prepared kind of situation to one of more grace and wisdom of being able to see things in their wholeness.
Mm,
So
yeah,
that to me feels like that's what maybe shifted internally. If I could describe that's what it was, that's probably what happened.
I love that. When you started, when did you start your meditative process? Like
Oh,
your practice, like you, because I knew, but I think I knew before that started,
yeah.
right as that was starting. And do you think that was a catalyst, when you went deep, when you were able to transition deeper into that?
Yeah.
Like you sat
So,
with Deepak Chopra and like,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of really good teachers. He was one of them. Uh, so curiosity about internal states, I now can actually trace back to childhood. I had a crazy imagination. So I spent a lot of time in my imagination. And I read a lot. It was my escape. It was the only place oftentimes that I felt safe was in my head, actually. And so, like my family still teases me about always having my nose in a book. So being able to focus one's mind, I fortunately have had that most of my life. I don't remember not, I mean, when I'm not able to do that, there are times where I have not, particularly like when I have experiences of like clinical depression and other times, like, that focus kind of, it's a sign for me that I'm in trouble. Um, so was able to focus at an early age, kind of think through reading and imaginative play and things like that. I got enrolled in a French class when I was a little kid, and my teacher, smart teacher, wicked smart teacher, would have us go on our mats and we would learn anatomy by doing body scans in French.
what?
It was crazy because the first time I was taken through a body scan in my in my 20s, in medical school, I was like, all of a sudden I'm 5, 6,
Right.
7, laying on my little mat in my French class going, la tête, les yeux. And, you know, I didn't appreciate, because when you learn meditation, they take you through, have you experienced this before? Because it's all about drawing up internal awareness and interoceptive awareness and saying, you've been here before, you've done this before. And so we've had to create this narrative of that developmental stage. And so that was one big one, right? And then I started doing yoga and meditation, kind of the traditional breath work. And again, learning to attend to my breath, right? Which is the first stage of meditation. And then during my training as a palliative care physician, particularly taking care of kids, so I take care of infants and kids who are dying, hypnosis is one of our key tools because we have a high hypnotic state, capability when we're little to transform our experiences of pain, particularly. And through hypnosis, my life completely changed.
What?
Mhm. And so I, learned all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. That's the kind of a thing that most people don't understand.
And it's just putting yourself in the state.
It's a trance-like state that's a little bit different than the meditative practices. It has an intention of discovery. It has if you look at meditation there's a what we call attending practices, which is learning to focus one's mind and concentrate, which then leads to what we call discovery or allowing practices. For those of you who are in meditation, that would be vipassana, where you're able to concentrate enough and allow whatever experience to kind of come up, kind of thing. Hypnosis, to some extent, delves into that area and goes on a hunt purposefully versus standing in witness and allowing whatever to come up. Right.
Okay.
And then the third type of meditation, which is where my practice has evolved from now over the last 25 years, is into what we call awareness practices, which is this faculty of right hemisphere, left hemisphere, unconsciousness, consciousness kind of coming together in whole brains and a whole brain faculty and awareness and stabilizing that.
Do you practice that on a daily basis? Is that?
Yeah. I mean, meditation's a huge part of my life. There's formal and informal practices kind of in and out all day long. And then obviously retreats are important, kind of where you kind of delve deep into those states and cultivate different parts of things. It's shard work to some extent. So yeah.
Oh my gosh. Listen, there are so many questions. We're going to have to do another podcast.
You just tell me when and where.
If you're up for it. I have a couple of questions before I let you go. In your TED Talk, you said your life's work was finding the answer to the question, how to live more in the present without a catastrophic event.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we're touching on that. That's kind of a bit, but give me a simplified case. Let's make the case for people to not wait until they get catastrophic news. To what would you say to someone that's listening right now saying, I want some of that. I need to be, I don't want that to happen. Because we have heard so many people say, oh, having whatever was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. And everyone that listens to it's like, what? Is this some kind of, you're just trying to make yourself feel better about it? But it's the knowing on the other side of that. And that's what you're talking about. How can people shift that from before something like that happens? Is that a question that can be answered?
I mean, to some extent, that's what the kind of the whole writing of the book is. I mean, that's why suffer is a command. It's suffer, period, as the title of the book, because it's a verb, right? So, So my argument is that when you assess and attend your needs, right? So you have to be able to kind of say, okay, I'm willing to kind of walk into this space and take a look at myself, right? And say what basic fundamental need, whether it's, the basic needs, the becoming needs. So we talked about, kind of fear or the needs for safety and connection, right? Whether it's self-esteem or exploration or even the higher needs of intimacy and purpose, that all of us are trying to meet all of those needs at any given time. But your entire life view, according to Maslow, it's through your most unmet, prepotent need. So if you are hungry, nothing else is going to matter.
That's right.
Right. And so honoring and understanding what your basic needs are, learning to listen to the signals, the, pre-incident indicators, that says, hey, I need to attend to this. That's what the book is offering, is this kind of practical, like, do I feel safe? Do I know that I matter? Right. Right. Do I know who I am? All of it. Am I willing to grow? Like, so offers an inquiry that feels a little bit more tangible than, the traditional meditation of just sit and it'll come up. And, when I ask those certain questions of people, they're like, oh, yeah, I don't feel safe. And then it gives us a place to kind of
That's right.
go down the road of, okay, why don't you feel safe? What are the what are the components of safety that are going unmet? And then you just focus on that.
Mm.
And
That
then
sounded so
move yourself up.
simplistic.
It is. It's
Yeah.
simple, not easy.
That's right.
That's
right.
the thing. It's simple, but not easy.
And I am, here we have, going to therapy with a lot of regularity right now. And
Yes.
it is that safe container to continue the work. So I went for 10 years, shout out to Joanne Huber, thank goodness. And I think where I'm at now, like the continuation of that is kind of exciting in some way. It's also daunting and all the things. But yet my time with you is and will continue to be the reminder of how fucking important it is to keep doing the work, man, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah, because the crises will come, right? They will come. And being prepared, right? And equipped with your life and kind of saying, okay, the waves, the comings and goings of life, right, it will happen to me. And I want to learn how to surf. I want to learn how to swim, right? Instead of
Nice.
being drowned by that. And so, so equipping yourself and creating context for when when things happen to you, right? That you're prepared and actually can take the power of that and transform it into something wholly different.
So you've given me another visual. I'm now going to think of me on a surfboard on top of the wave, not underneath in the riptide, in the current. That Richard Bach book, The Illusionist, I think. The one where he talks about getting into the flow and not getting hung up on a rock. So I literally, sometimes I'm like, ooh, I'm on a rock. I got to get, back in the flow. So now I'm going to get back in the flow on my surfboard. I like it. I like it. What's the next shift for you? What are you looking forward to now? Like, as you're sitting here, this book that's about to come out, and I'm going to just say to people, you said something, the book is a guide to get you through that. Like, people, go pre-order this book and we'll talk about how to find that. But you're about to shift into, my prediction is what's going to be you on some very big stages, because the message that you have is so timely right now. Are you prepared for that? Are you excited about that? How are you feeling about that?
Don't know. I mean, tangibly, I think what's happening is there's a shift in identity that's now include this concept of being an author, right? Talking about something, jumping into an intimate situation, there's a lot of intimacy when you have to put your words on a piece of paper, and the creation of that thought process. And so, that experience is transformative of itself. And so, having that as an identity and being able to kind of walk into that creative space open-hearted and not sure really about what that looks like in an external manifestation. The genetics internally have changed. What we call the genotype feels like that has changed, and what the phenotype looks like has yet to be determined, kind of how it fully manifests. So that's the only way I can talk about it, is that internally, Jeanette, from a genome standpoint, from like the core of who I am, that has changed. And now I'm just waiting, kind of anticipating what the the manifestation or the phenotype of that is going to be.
I knew you were struggling with it because when you sent over your bio, in the bio, it said she's working on a book or something. It was like, and so I changed it. I said,
I
she's
know
an
you
author.
What is a commitment?
Did you hear it when I was
I
reading?
did.
Okay. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, hell no. Like, I mean, there's everybody wants to write a book, but the discipline of
Mhm.
writing the book, and then let's add into it the insecurities as you're
Yeah.
describing, you now are going to have to defend your words. And you'll likely change your mind about some things, and that's okay because that's
Sure.
just who you are. You'll learn more information. But I think, as you step into that place of knowing, I have talked to authors before that have said, I didn't realize how much bigger and heavier my words were gonna be once they hit the airwaves. And, right? I hope you're ready for that. I think it'll be fun.
You know, the you talk about the insecurity. I mean, that I come from a lens of a physician who has 4 primary oaths. Always honor people's wishes as much as you possibly can within the context of medicine, but it's a limited resource, so there's gotta be justice in there, so autonomy and justice kind of balance each other. But the other 2 things, first, do no harm and always do good by your patient. I don't wanna cause any harm. And so there's, that part of me is, what is my intention? I'm always asking all of those kind of things. And so the weightiness of the words that I'm saying, I don't want to be dismissive of people suffering because God knows I've watched it, I've experienced it myself. And the last thing you need is someone to kind of be glib about the worst thing that happened in your life and tell you, oh, you'll get through this and you'll be the better for it. When you're in the midst of suffering, you don't want to hear that shit. You just want somebody to sit with you and kind of wallow in it, right? And so I want to honor all of those kind of things. So I don't want to cause harm and I want to do the best by people. Um, so
I love that. It and I don't know how to ask this question, it's gonna be
yeah,
clunky. I'm sure they all have been though, so just bear with me.
whatever.
When you think about, all of those moments where you have been present as someone transitioned, is there one that stands out to you as the most intense or life-changing, or I don't know how to ask that question. What's something that stands out to you? And if not one, oh,
Yeah, I actually talk about it in the TED Talk. Um, uh, yeah, I was bearing witness to a May to December relationship in the context of the, um, the wife of a wife-husband pair was, suffering pancreatic cancer. It was ravaging her. And, um, I walked in, and when you talk about intimacy, I got to see it on, kind of, I walked in, it was clear. I was outside of a very tangible bubble of intimacy. I mean, I was gobsmacked by it. Like my social worker actually ran right into the back of me because I stopped because it was such a profound, engaging love experience that I had never borne witness to in that way. Um, and I just bathed in it for a few minutes. That alone was transformative to feel that presence, and the weightiness and the importance of that in people's lives. So it taught me about that. That's actually really why that word changed for me, and naming that specifically as a need, and reshaping some of the words Maslow had said around that because of that experience. And then I was actually asked to come into that intimacy and help foster this transformative suffering that was occurring. And she was both of them were very wise beyond their years. At one point, she looked at me and she's like, can you help me understand? Help me deal with this. She's like, my entire life, I have honored the temple of my body. I have honored and grown my mind. Please tell me why it is that I must suffer this way. And to sit with her in that. Uh, that was one of those other kind of moments that was like, oh, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. And so she taught me more in that moment. And I only can hope that I met the needs that she required in order to die peacefully, which she did about a week and a half later.
I have no doubt you did, my friend. Listen, I'm sad to end this conversation, but it's not the end. It's the continuation. And I'm so proud of you and what you're doing. And I'm so excited about the people that are going to be changed forever from the words that you have been willing to put on a page. That's in service of humanity in my book. And I will say this, I hope that people will read this book. I hope that people will follow you. There is a TED Talk, so I did watch it again before we got on this call today. So people can find you. It's a TEDx talk, Dr. Jennifer Clark. That the book is called Suffer, period, with a period on there. Can they pre-order that now through Amazon yet? How do they find you? Do they go to thegiftofchoosing.com to find that? Tell us everything.
Yeah. So there are a couple places you can learn more about the book. As we discussed, I'm, kind of the whole publishing industry is kind of being upended at the moment, reflecting kind of the way intellectual property is being handled in the creative spaces like music and writing and art and all of those kind of things. And so, yes, go to The Gift of Choosing, sign up for updates, pre-orders. We had a window where there was this small window where people could buy those. That has kind of now closed. We're now moving into the actual publication process. And the books will be available probably towards the end of September, electronically, and then in print kind of mid-October, with the hoping that, kind of we'll have some book events and things like that in the late fall. And so, yeah, so if you want to go to The Gift of Choosing, both Instagram and is kind of Instagram, LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn just because that's the way business works, as well as the website, and you can find updates kind of through there. We're in the process of updating my website right now. There was my publisher made a video and all sorts of fun little things to kind of help describe the book and things like that. So be on the lookout for those changes probably in the next couple of weeks as we move through the latter part of revisions and into copy editing and then finally printing. So.
All right. Well, listen, thank you. I love you. I'm so grateful you're moving about this world at the same time that I am. Let's do it again.
Thanks, Tracy.